Megan wandered aimlessly down the street, her vision blurred by the relentless flood of tears. An hour ago, her world had crumbled, leaving her buried beneath its wreckage. She didn't know how she'd ever piece herself back together. Just that morning, she had believed she was happy, certain that nothing could go wrong. But then the news came. Her husband Brian had another woman. Megan and Brian had been married for 7 years. They'd met at a college party, and from that moment on, they were inseparable. Half a year of dating was all it took to convince them they were meant to be together. Their lively wedding ended with a week-long beach vacation, and then the rhythm of everyday life began. Ordinary days, just like everyone else's. Still, both Megan and Brian made an effort not to let life's challenges dampen their spirits. They supported each other through work struggles, laughed off financial hiccups over instant noodles and budget tea bags. They were young, carefree, and above all, happy. As time went on, their lives gradually settled. Brian climbed the career ladder, eventually landing a managerial position that provided them with a comfortable life. Megan, on the other hand, found herself stuck in a job that felt unfulfilling, performing routine tasks for a modest salary. 3 years ago, Brian's father fell seriously ill and required constant care. Brian turned to Megan, asking her to take on the responsibility. "My love, you understand, don't you? We could hire a nurse, but she'd be a stranger. I want only family to be with him." "Family?" Megan hesitated. "Well, obviously I can't be there all the time because of work, but I'll visit as often as I can, and I'll make sure you have everything you need. Please, Megan, say yes. Your job only stresses you out anyway. This way, you'll be home, taking care of what really matters." After a moment's hesitation, she agreed. From the very next day, Megan devoted herself to her new role. The care her father-in-law needed consumed all her time, but his grateful eyes were her sole comfort. When he passed, Megan's life returned to its usual routine, or almost. Finding work in her field proved difficult, but Brian reassured her, "Take a break. You've earned it." And so, Megan became a full-time homemaker. One day, she decided to visit Brian's father's old apartment, which had been vacant for nearly a year. She wanted to tidy up and collect some forgotten items. But as soon as she stepped inside, Megan realized the place was anything but abandoned. Her shock only deepened when a toddler with bright, inquisitive eyes toddled toward her. From the kitchen emerged a stunning young woman, no older than 25. "Who are you? And what are you doing here?" Megan asked, too startled to even introduce herself. "I'm Sophia," the woman replied, picking up the boy. "And this is Ethan, my son. We live here. Who are you?" "This is my husband Brian's apartment. That's who I am." Megan's voice trembled with disbelief. Sophia frowned. "Your husband? What are you talking about?" Without waiting for an invitation, Megan marched through the apartment, Sophia trailing behind her, the child balanced on her hip. Megan finally sank onto the living room couch. "Is he Brian's son?" she demanded, pointing at the boy. Sophia nodded. "Call him, now." Sophia obediently dialed, her hands trembling. Within seconds, Brian's familiar voice came through the line. "Hey, sweetheart, is something wrong?" Megan grabbed the phone. "No, everything's just fine, darling." A pause. "Megan?" Brian's voice faltered. "What are you doing there?" "How could you?" she hissed. "While I was caring for your sick father, you built a whole new life." Her voice rose. "You're nothing but a liar, a coward, a complete disgrace." She slammed the phone back into Sophia's hand and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Now Megan wandered the streets aimlessly, rain mingling with her tears. Liar, cheat, betrayer, her thoughts screamed. And then another thought, sharper and more painful. A child. He has a child. Megan had always dreamed of having children. From the early days of their marriage, she'd hoped, but she'd never been able to conceive. Every time she'd suggested seeing a doctor, Brian had talked her out of it. Then, during those years of caring for his father, the idea had faded into the background. But deep down, she'd clung to the hope that it wasn't her, that maybe it was just a matter of time or circumstances. But now, the existence of Brian's son shattered that hope. So, it was her after all. She was barren, and now she was utterly alone. No family, no children, no job. She had nothing. She was nothing. The rain poured harder, but Megan didn't notice. She wandered through an overgrown path of abandoned gardens, oblivious to the world around her. Her phone rang incessantly in her bag, but she ignored it. Finally exhausted, she spotted an old wooden bench beneath a tree and collapsed onto it, leaning her head against the rough bark. She closed her eyes, her body sinking into a heavy numbness. Twilight descended, and the cold rain lashed at her face. But Megan couldn't move. She couldn't care. She couldn't feel anything at all. While 3-year-old Arthur ran off from his grandmother, he splashed through puddles, giggling at the sprays of water shooting up from his bare feet. "Arthur, you little rascal, you're going to be the death of me," called the frail old woman, struggling to catch up with him. "Where are you going, stomping through puddles like that? You'll catch a cold. And then what? I'll have to nurse you all week. Oh, my poor boy." She finally managed to grab hold of the mischievous toddler, but a sharp pain in her back forced her to release him. She straightened up slowly, wincing, and glanced around for a bench. That's when she noticed a young woman sitting beneath a tree, drenched from the rain. Startled, the grandmother hesitated. Is she even alive? Summoning her courage, she stepped closer and gently touched the woman's shoulder. "Dear, who are you? What are you doing out here in the rain? Did something happen?" The young woman, Megan, opened her eyes and quickly said, "Please don't worry about me. I'll leave soon. I got lost, that's all." "Leave? In this darkness? Don't be ridiculous. Come with me. My house isn't far. I live with my grandson, Arthur." From behind the old woman peered the curious face of a blond, wide-eyed boy. Megan smiled and rose to her feet, thanking the grandmother. Seeing the child, she extended her arms. "How about I carry you?" she offered playfully. Arthur eagerly clambered into her embrace, curling his chilled little legs against her. Half an hour later, Arthur was bathed and tucked into warm clothes, while Megan had dried off and freshened up. She now sat in the kitchen with Margaret and the boy, sipping hot tea. Grateful for the warmth and company, Megan found herself pouring out her troubles to the older woman, holding nothing back. "Why did he do it, Mrs. Margaret? I gave Brian everything. My love, my care, my devotion. And yet, he betrayed me. He cheated while I was caring for his sick father. How could he? And the cruelest part? I can't have children. All I ever wanted was to have a little boy like Arthur." Megan gently placed the sleepy toddler on her lap, rocking him tenderly as his eyelids drooped. Margaret sighed, watching the scene. "You're kind, Megan. He senses that. You've got a mother's heart. But Brian? Sounds like my daughter-in-law. She left my son Oliver just like that, with Arthur barely a year old. Oliver was away working, earning for the family, and she ran off with someone else. Didn't look back." Megan frowned. "But surely she regrets it. A mother would come back for her child." Margaret shook her head. "No, dear. She's not coming back. She passed away. There was an accident. She was with some man, and they didn't make it. Worse, she sold their apartment before she left. And the money? It's all gone. Poor Oliver had to take Arthur and bring him here to me. He's still finishing his contract work, but each day it gets harder for me to care for the little one." Margaret's voice softened. "But look at him. He's fast asleep. Such a sweet boy." Megan carried Arthur to his bed, tucked him in gently, and helped Margaret clear the kitchen. That night, as she lay down to sleep, she realized she hadn't thought about Brian for hours. 2 months passed. Megan stayed with Margaret and Arthur, helping around the house, looking after the little boy, and becoming deeply attached to both of them. She rarely ventured into the city, preferring the simplicity of life in the quiet house. When Brian tried to call her, she sent him a message to forget her and turned off her phone for good. One evening, Margaret suddenly gasped and collapsed into a chair. Megan rushed to her, supporting her frail frame and calling an ambulance. The doctors admitted Margaret for tests, and Megan took on even more responsibilities, caring for Arthur, visiting Margaret in the hospital, and bringing her home-cooked meals. Margaret often said, "Thank God you're here, Megan. I know Arthur has someone who loves him like a mother." One night, as Megan was putting Arthur to bed, reading him a story and softly humming a lullaby, the boy's eyes widened. He sat up, pointing over her shoulder. "Daddy! Daddy!" he cried. Megan turned to see a tall, handsome man standing in the doorway, staring at her in surprise. Arthur leapt into his arms, giggling with joy. "Arthur, who's this?" the man asked, nodding toward Megan. Arthur cupped his father's face with his little hands and whispered solemnly, "That's my mommy, but it's a secret." 2 years passed. Oliver and Megan were married and happy, raising Arthur together in a spacious new home Oliver had bought. Margaret often said she'd found the perfect daughter-in-law, while Arthur, now calling Megan Mommy, basked in her unconditional love. One day, Megan ran into Brian. He approached her quickly, smiling. "Megan, my love, it's so good to see you. How are you?" "Fine, thank you. You don't look so great yourself," she replied coolly. Brian sighed. "I've been through a lot. My wife, she lied to me. She wasn't carrying my child. She just wanted revenge on her ex. I spent 3 years raising someone else's kid. Megan, I made a mistake. Please, let's start over. I still love you." Megan smiled coldly. "You're too late, Brian. My love isn't yours anymore." "But, Megan, you can't have children. Who else would want you?" She laughed softly. "Oh, Brian, I'm not childless anymore." At that moment, a car pulled up, and Oliver stepped out waving to her. Megan ran to him. "Who was that?" Oliver asked, nodding toward Brian. "Just someone asking for directions," Megan said with a smile. "Oh, and Oliver, I have news." He raised an eyebrow. "Good news, I hope." "The best. I'm pregnant." Oliver swept her into his arms, spinning her around as they laughed. As they drove away, Brian stood frozen on the spot, realizing too late that he'd lost his chance at happiness. That's how the story ends, friends. Join the conversation below and share your thoughts on this story. If you found it captivating, share the link with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new story that will make your heart race. Your support inspires us to create more tales. Take care and see you next time.